Do you have a dream of starting a podcast, but you don't know where to start? It can feel totally overwhelming. Asking questions like, well, what equipment do I need? Where do I record? How do I get my voice onto those podcast apps? How do I come up with content? Those are all common and great questions. But first, we're going to have to start with 3 basic questions before we even answer those questions. If you are a female Christian entrepreneur or life coach, you need a podcast. And if you have a podcast, you need a podcast coach. Finding a supportive and empowering community is key to podcaster success. Through my holistic approach as a trained life coach and my experience in the podcast industry since 2016, I want to encourage you weekly through answering your podcasting questions. I'm cheering for you, and your voice matters. Hey friend, welcome to Holistic Podcasting, podcast coaching for female entrepreneurs. I am your host, Kristin Chadwick. I want to start out today's show with giving a shout out to Kim Stu Inspired at Book Marketing Mania for her Apple review. Thanks for leaving a message. You guys, I love shouting you guys out. I appreciate when you guys take the time. I mean, it takes like 30 seconds to leave a review, but it is my love language. I love hearing from you guys. I love hearing what's sticking out to you and what is helpful. And let me read what she wrote. So grateful I discovered Kristin's show. The podcasting struggle is real, whether you're waiting to start one, in the midst of a launch, or in need of support to grow and reach new listeners. You will learn so much from Kristin and her incredible guests. Awesome strategies for growing your show. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate those. And like I said, it does warm my heart every time I read those. And I really check my stats inside of Libsyn, which is the hosting platform. And I love discovering where everybody is listening in. And I know I've shouted out Texas, North Carolina, California, Ohio. I see you. Of course, I see our home state, Colorado. I just want to say hello and thank you guys for listening to the show. All right. I want to really introduce myself. If this is your first time listening to Holistic Podcasting, I'm sure you're like, who is this gal? Who is Kristin? And I want to just introduce myself before we start this conversation of where do I even start a podcast? Because perhaps this is your first time listening and you are genuinely just looking, how do I even start a podcast? Now, let me tell you my background. I have been in the podcasting world since 2016. I have helped launch over 25 podcasts, including top charted podcasters in multiple categories, and started and grown 2 of my very own heartfelt successful podcasts, this one being one. And I've recorded well over 300 episodes, some of them messy, some of them vulnerable, some of them great, some of them life-changing, some of them not so great, some of them, they're there just to give me some humility, right? And I've learned a ton over these last 7 years now. And I want to help you navigate this wide expanse of starting a podcast. It's an incredible opportunity for you to deliver your message that's on your heart through the power of podcasting. It's amplifying your voice. And I hope you go back and listen to previous episodes where it is my heart to champion you, to encourage you, to really let you know that there is purpose in podcasting. And I really and truly believe that you are worthy and you have been chosen to be seen, heard, and known. And I know that might sound dramatic for some people, but it is true, you guys. We each have a purpose and we each have a message that we are called to deliver. All right, let's keep going. So one of the things that I've learned as a podcast coach is that there are many different personality types that come into this space of wanting to start a podcast. There are the people who are amazing go-getters. They are the dreamers, the visionaries, and they want to get things started and all the things started at once. They are highly motivated. They are the achievers, those Enneagram 3s wanting to get it out. Then there are the right in the middle, like the solid. I just want to start a podcast. I'm not sure where I want to go from there, but I do want to start a podcast. They feel pretty solid, but they are kind of lost on where to go in the step-by-step, day-to-day processes. Then there's the one that is a little bit more timid. Maybe they have struggled using their voice. Maybe they have like this little ounce of courage that has helped them to say yes to podcasting, but it is overwhelming the amount of fear or mindset that can creep in for them. So all of these women in whatever capacity, certainly there's not just 3, and you could be all of those in one day. I know I have. And one thing that there is a common thread through all of them, even if they're approaching it differently, is that having a step-by-step plan with a podcast coach is going to help navigate these vast waters. Otherwise, you think about the highly motivated, the achiever, Enneagram 3, you're going to have days where you're going to lose your umph. You're going to burn out. The solid in the middle beginner podcaster is going to start to question. They're going to battle against mindset. Or the cautious podcaster is going to lose courage and stop moving forward, or perhaps be frozen because it's too much. And so I want to speak to each of those today. And it's a little bit, so this past weekend, my family and I were able to go on a trip with my husband's financial firm up to the mountains. And my family and I, like the kids and I, we were going to be doing a lot of exploring while he was in business meetings. Now, I was super excited to get going. I love going on adventures, especially with my family. But there was a part of me that was like, well, I don't know what I don't know, right? And I'm sure that you have felt that way with podcasting. I've actually had that conversation with multiple podcasters in the last couple weeks where they're saying, Kristin, I don't know what I don't know about podcasting. So here I am, I'm packing, I'm trying to prepare for this trip. I get an email from my husband's business with an itinerary. There's a link of ideas of what we could do around this beautiful mountain town of Snowmass. And I knew even if I clicked that link and I looked over all of the things and I prepared myself, nothing was going to be the same as when we got there and started to explore on our own. And I'm using this analogy in podcasting because it's very similar. We can, and I actually have talked about this before in another episode, where with a road trip, we have a plan, right? There's a plan of action. It's very rare that you ever get into the car and you're like, I don't know where I'm going to go. But with a road trip or any kind of trip, there's a plan in place, right? And we don't know what's actually going to happen until we're in the moment of the traveling. So we can have those destinations plugged in. We can have those step-by-step towns that we're going to stop in or explore. And we don't know until we're in it. And just like with this trip, I had to walk around the hotel. I had to walk around the mountain and explore. We had to get out and experience this town and ride the gondola and ride the shuttles and explore the parks to really know what was happening in this space. And having a coach walk us step by step through the podcasting business and the podcast launch process is going to be a lot like that. I can tell you all the things on where to start, but there are some things that you are going to discover along the way that you need someone to coach you through. That's why I have created these podcast boot camps, one for beginners who are wanting to launch a podcast and one for seasoned podcasters who want to take their podcast to another level. Because until you get started, until you're in the process, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where the coaching of mindset, of a podcast plan, of really having somebody come alongside you and not be alone in this process and this journey is going to be extremely valuable and exponentially increase your success in your podcast. This is my plug right here. Podcast Bootcamp from idea to launch. That's the beginner course. That is my bootcamp that's starting August 1st. It's a 9-week group coaching course where I'm going to guide you through the process of starting your podcast. And we're going to take that beautiful dream, that impactful dream, and bring it into a doable, bite-sized, actionable steps to help you successfully launch your first episode recorded. And inside that group, we're going to walk through, see, this is the map. I'm giving you the map right here. We're going to walk through your mission, your purpose, podcast content planning, equipment, how do you set it up, what do you need, walking you through that, literally through Zoom. We set you up to sound the best. Your podcast art tile, we're going to help you choose your hosting platform and how to create excellent shows and content. So if you want to snag your spot, I only open 15 spots because I like to have an intimate, small group to walk this through. Because like I said, there is something valuable about having a guide along the way, just on a trip, a road trip, or going to a new place. Having that small group, you will be seen, you will be heard, and you will be known in that process. Now, I said that we were going to answer that question of where do I even start? And so I want to leave you with these 3 things to think about. Number 1, why do you want to start a podcast? 2, who are you serving? And number 3, what do you have to offer? So number 1, why do you want to start a podcast? We start with the why because it is the very backbone of your podcast. And I encourage you, there's multiple podcasts in holistic podcasting where I dig into the why, and I encourage you to go listen to that for more in depth. But I want you to just sit with these questions. Why do you want to start a podcast? Here we can really focus in on the reality. Do you want to create impact? Do you want to increase your business exposure? Do you want to share your story? Is it a hobby? Is it just for fun? Is it documentation? I want you to really sit down and ask yourself these questions. It's going to be the bedrock of how you're going to build your podcast and whether this is a good fit for you. I want to give you a little story of when we're not clear on our why. So I met with a couple of people for coffee one day who had found out that I was a podcast producer, a podcast coach, and they wanted to meet with me about starting a podcast. Well, as we started digging in and I was asking, well, why do you want to start a podcast? Well, it was very clear right off the bat that they really didn't know why, other than it sounded fun. Now, you can start a podcast just for fun. But if you're going to want to create an impact, you got to get clear. Their agenda was just to record funny conversation between 2 men. And the hard part with that is very few people like listening to an unclear purpose and an unclear time. People's time is precious, especially nowadays. So when you aren't clear on your why, and that can change too, totally fine. But when you're not clear on our why, it's going to confuse your listener. Now, I want to contrast that with another client of mine. Actually, I'll tell you, those 2 guys ended up following through with starting their podcast. And I can tell you because their why was not impactful enough for them. This other client of mine who started had a very, very clear purpose of why she wanted to start a podcast. It was to grow her business. It was to serve her future clients well. And even on the hard days, she has focused on the why. It is the why you press record even when you don't feel like it. Okay. Number 2, answering the question of who are you serving? So who do you want to serve? I will say most often, this person is you, but a couple years ago. And this is especially true in the coaching industry and ministry and any type of leadership role. Really dig into this person. What are their pain points? What are their common struggles, phrases? What do they lay awake at night thinking about? I know there's some podcasters out there like Alex Sanfilippo. He's the owner of Podmatch. He also has a Podcasting Made Simple podcast, and he talks about his ideal listener. He has a specific name for him. So if you need to name your person, maybe it's a good friend of yours that you are talking to, but who do you want to serve? Another thing too, to think about when you think about who is before, before you record your podcast is, does this matter to who I want to serve? If you can't think of more than one person, then I would say go back to the drawing board. It's really important that you think of who you want to serve. Right now, I'm thinking of specific people who would benefit from this podcast as they are on the fence on whether to start a podcast, or they've expressed that they want to start a podcast. And I know that hearing these 3 questions is going to benefit them. So again, sit down, journal, process with a friend, with your spouse. Who do you want to serve? All right, number 3 was, what do you have to offer? What are you bringing to the table? What do people come to you and ask you about? It makes me think of that Facebook post that people will put on of like, if you could do a TED Talk without any prep, what would you talk about? This is in essence the same question. What is it that people come to you and ask you about, and you could just spout it off right off the bat? I know I'm thinking of a current client right now. She's a homeschool mom. She could talk for an hour without stopping on the benefits of homeschooling. I know a financial coach that she could talk about the benefits of women understanding financial literacy without any preparation. I know of a Christian Kingdom Life coach that she could spout off for an hour or more on how to hear from God. So what are those things that people come to you about? Maybe you're the mom that people come to when their kids are struggling. You have great wisdom. Maybe people come to you and ask questions about nutrition or how to feed your family well. Maybe it's advice on healing, on heart work, on addictions, on navigating boundaries. These are some ideas that, as I'm thinking of the people that could be listening to this, you have something to offer. You could talk about ketogenics. You could talk about spiritual warfare. You could talk about, there's just so many things. So just be honest with yourself and ask the Lord, what are those giftings that He has put in your heart? Those are beautiful. That is beautiful fruit of the sufferings that you have walked through to give to somebody else. Now, I am passionate about that we all have that message to deliver, right? Also, I want to read to you 1 Peter 4:10, which says, this is from the Passion Translation. Did you know? Nope, just kidding. Let me start right here. 1 Peter 4:10. Every believer has received grace gifts, so use them to serve one another as faithful servants of the many-colored tapestry of God's grace. Now, For example, if you have a speaking gift, speak as though God were speaking his words through you. If you have a gift of serving, do it passionately with the strength God gives you, so that in everything God alone will be glorified through Jesus Christ. For to him belong the power and the glory forever throughout the ages. I love that. Our gifts are for the benefit of others. Isn't that beautiful? And I love where it says, so use them to serve one another as faithful stewards of the many-colored tapestry of God's grace. We are a colorful tapestry. And when we hold those gifts to ourselves, we miss out on this opportunity to become this giant quilt, this beautiful quilt for the sake of others. So how are you going to step into your giftings through this podcast? So those are the 3 things I want you to start to think about before we even talk about the nitty gritty, which we will. We will talk about the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about equipment next week. Where do you even start with equipment and where do you even begin? All of that. But these 3 questions: why do you want to start a podcast? Who are you serving? And what do you have to offer? So those 3 questions, take time, journal it out. And I want to hear from you. Find me inside of our Facebook group and Holistic Podcasting. It's a free group. I would love to hear your process. And again, snag your spot. If you are wanting to start your podcast by October, then snag your spot today. We start the first week of August. This is for beginner podcasters, from somebody who is like, hey, I have been thinking about a podcast. I'm ready to start. Sign up today. I know there was a lot of interest for August. So the earlier you sign up, the better chances you get of reserving your spot. All right. That is it, my friend, on that topic. And I want to end with, I told you last week that I'm trying to be intentional about answering your podcast questions. And so this question comes from someone who is in my world right now. And I love this question is, what do you do when you run out of content? Now, this is a great question and it could be a whole episode on its own. But I continue to go back to, what is your ideal listener going through currently? So right now, if it's summertime and you're like, what does your person need to hear right now? How can you encourage them? How can you coach them? What can you speak into their lives about? And really honing in on those pain points, on what are the things that they're laying awake at night? Where were you in that season? What are those common struggles that they might be going through, or phrases? Just continuing to go back to that, especially in every season, because every season is going to be different. There's my quick answer to your podcast questions. Keep sending those in. I love hearing those from you and answering those quickly. All right. Remember, take your spot. If you're wanting to start that podcast, I want to see you in there. And as always, know that I believe in you. You are worthy of being seen, being heard, and being known. Take care. Thanks for listening today, you guys. Hey, before you go, this summer, we are going to offer you a chance to join in to our next round of boot camps. There are 2. One is for the brand new podcaster. You don't have a podcast yet, but you are wanting to launch a podcast by the end of 2023. Our podcast bootcamp from idea to launch is an 8-week group coaching course for you who is ready to take that step and make that dream a reality. And our second podcast bootcamp is our podcast growth and monetization. This is a chance for my current podcasters out there that are wanting to up level and continue to grow and expand and monetize your business with your podcast. This is another 8-week program where we are going to be group coaching with you week by week and having that accountability to up-level your podcast. So come and join me. The link's down below. We start August 1st, so make sure you sign up by the end of July.